The alien fortress on planet X-274 stood like a massive steel mountain against the purple sky. Inside, Commander Red of the Galactic Alliance's Special Forces lay quiet in his cell, his blue eyes fixed on the ceiling. The aliens who captured him, tall, gray-skinned beings called the Shadows, thought they had won. They were wrong. 3 days earlier, Red had allowed himself to be captured during a routine patrol near the outer rim of human space. The Shadows believed they had caught a simple human soldier, but Red was anything but simple. 20 years of special operations experience had taught him that sometimes, to destroy an enemy, you had to let them think they had the upper hand. The cell they kept him in was standard alien design, energy fields, automated feeding system, and constant surveillance. What the Shadows didn't know was that every piece of technology they used to keep him contained was giving him exactly what he needed: information. Red's neural implant, hidden beneath a layer of synthetic skin, had been scanning and recording everything since the moment he arrived. Every guard rotation, every security protocol, every power fluctuation in the base's systems, all of it fed directly into the quantum computer nestled in his brain stem. The aliens had searched him, of course. They'd taken his weapons, his armor, and his communication devices. But they hadn't found the microscopic machines in his bloodstream, the ones that had been slowly but steadily multiplying since his capture. These nanites were his real weapons, and they were almost ready. As he lay there, appearing defeated and broken to his captors, Red mentally reviewed his mission parameters. The Shadows had been raiding human colonies for months, always vanishing before a proper military response could be mounted. Their supposedly impenetrable stealth technology had made them bold, arrogant. They never considered that humans would find a way to track them back to their base. Red smiled slightly as his neural implant registered the completion of the nanite reproduction cycle. In his mind's eye, he could see the microscopic army now flooding his system, billions of tiny machines, each programmed with a specific task. Some would disable security systems, others would corrupt data cores, and still others would turn the base's own power grid against itself. The guard passed by his cell for the evening check, mandibles clicking in what Red had learned was their expression of contempt. The alien didn't notice the nearly invisible mist that leaked from Red's pores, carrying millions of nanites into the base's ventilation system. As night fell on X-274, Red closed his eyes and began the countdown. In 6 hours, this entire base would cease to exist, and the Shadows would learn a lesson that many others had learned before them: taking a human prisoner was easy. Keeping them prisoner was impossible. And if you were foolish enough to capture a human special forces operator? Well, that was just asking for your entire base to vanish without a trace. Tomorrow, when the Galactic Alliance's response fleet arrived, they would find nothing but a crater where the Shadow base had been. And Commander Red would be long gone, already planning his next mission, leaving behind another testament to humanity's most terrifying quality: their ability to turn capture into conquest. The first sign that something was wrong came during the midnight shift change. A guard stationed in the lower levels reported that his security terminal was displaying random characters instead of the usual status updates. The Shadow technician who responded dismissed it as a minor glitch and performed a standard system restart. That was exactly what Commander Red had been waiting for. The restart created a 5-second gap in the base's security network, an eternity for the billions of nanites now spreading through the facility's systems. As the computers came back online, Red's microscopic army had already embedded itself deep within the base's core programming. In his cell, Red remained motionless, but his neural implant was buzzing with activity. Through the nanites, he could sense the entire base like an extension of his own body. He could feel the power flowing through the corridors, the data streaming through communication channels, and most importantly, the growing confusion among the Shadow personnel. The base's chief of security, a veteran Shadow warrior known as the Fong, was the first to realize that something was seriously wrong. The temperature control systems in the weapons storage had begun to malfunction, slowly cooking the plasma cores of their energy weapons. By the time anyone noticed, half their arsenal was already compromised. Red's nanites worked with surgical precision. They didn't just destroy, they sowed chaos. Security cameras would show empty corridors when they were full and full corridors when they were empty. Communication systems would cross channels randomly, sending private commands to public frequencies and routine messages to high-security terminals. The Shadow's legendary composure began to crack. Red could hear them in the corridors, their usually measured clicks and whistles taking on a frantic tone. They were warriors, trained to face enemies they could see and fight. But how do you fight an enemy that has turned your own base against you? 3 hours into the operation, the first major systems began to fail. The artificial gravity flickered, sending unprepared guards floating momentarily before slamming them back to the ground. Emergency doors sealed and unsealed randomly, trapping groups of Shadow personnel in various sections of the base. The Fang ordered a complete shutdown of all non-essential systems, hoping to isolate the problem. It was exactly the wrong move. The shutdown simply gave Red's nanites control over which systems would be allowed to restart. Within minutes, the base's power grid began to pulse in a complex pattern, a pattern that matched the resonant frequency of the Shadow's crystalline technology. Red finally moved, sitting up on his cell's bed. He could feel the vibrations through the floor, a deep, almost subsonic hum that made his teeth tingle. The Shadows couldn't hear it, but their equipment could feel it. Microscopic cracks began to appear in their quantum processors, their data cores, their communication arrays. The guard outside Red's cell was too busy staring at his malfunctioning weapon to notice the slight smile on his prisoner's face. The human's expression wasn't one of triumph or satisfaction, it was the patient look of a man watching a plan unfold exactly as designed. In the command center, the Fang finally understood what was happening. But as he rushed to order a complete evacuation of the base, he discovered that the communication systems would only broadcast one message, repeating endlessly in every Shadow dialect. Never imprison what you don't understand. The next 3 hours would prove to be the longest of the Fang's distinguished career, as he watched helplessly while one of the most secure facilities in Shadow space was systematically dismantled from within by an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't fight, and had foolishly believed was safely contained. The base's massive reactor core pulsed with an angry red glow as emergency sirens wailed through the corridors. In the central control room, the Fang slammed his fist against a console that no longer responded to any commands. Around him, his best technicians worked frantically to regain control of their dying systems. Commander Red stood up in his cell, no longer pretending to be a helpless prisoner. The energy field that had contained him flickered and died, its power diverted by millions of nanites that had infiltrated the prison block's electrical grid. He stepped out just as the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the corridors in a blood-red glow. Lock down the prisoner. The Fang's voice crackled through the few working speakers, distorted and broken. But the guards who should have responded were trapped 2 levels below, sealed in by security doors that refused to open. Their advanced weapons, pride of Shadow military technology, had been reduced to useless crystalline sculptures by the nanite-induced vibrations. Red walked calmly through the chaos, his neural implant feeding him a perfect map of the disintegrating base. The nanites had done more than just sabotage the facility, they had downloaded every piece of Shadow military intelligence, every technical specification, every strategic plan. Even if the base survived, the Shadow's military advantage would be gone. In the medical bay, Shadow scientists finally discovered the truth. Under their microscopes, they watched in horror as billions of microscopic machines swarmed through samples of their base's systems. But the discovery came too late. The nanites had already begun their final phase, molecular deconstruction. The walls themselves started to change. The super-strong alloys of the base's structure began to break down at the molecular level, transformed by the nanites into something new. The process released energy, causing the temperature in the base to rise steadily. Climate control systems, long since compromised, pumped the hot air throughout the facility instead of cooling it. The Fang ordered an emergency evacuation, but Red's nanites had been preparing for this. Every escape pod's navigation system had been reprogrammed. Any shadow who managed to launch would find themselves on a one-way trip to the nearest human military outpost. Not that many would get the chance, the pods themselves were already beginning to dissolve. Red accessed a computer terminal, his neural implant easily bypassing the corrupted security. He watched through the base's cameras as shadow warriors, renowned across the galaxy for their discipline, devolved into panic. Some tried to fight back against their invisible enemy with primitive physical weapons. Others attempted to transmit warnings to their fleet. A few simply stood in shocked silence, watching their impregnable fortress crumble around them. The reactor core's warning signals reached a fever pitch. The nanites had carefully manipulated its containment systems, creating a cascade effect that would turn the base's power source into the agent of its destruction. But this would be no ordinary explosion. The nanites had transformed the reactor's fuel into something that would leave no trace of shadow technology for others to study. In the command center, the Fang received one final message on his personal communicator. It was text-only, in simple human standard. Lesson 1 in Human Military Doctrine: we are never truly prisoners. We are either free, or we are in the process of freeing ourselves. Your base was doomed the moment you brought me inside. Red reached the base's upper level, where a hidden shuttle, constructed piece by his nanites from transformed shadow technology, waited. Behind him, the fortress that had terrorized human space for months was dissolving into its component atoms. Soon, there would be nothing left but a memory and a warning. The shadows had built their base to withstand any conventional attack. They had prepared for armies, fleets, and even planetary bombardment. But they hadn't prepared for this, for an enemy that turned their own technological superiority into a weapon against them. They hadn't prepared for human ingenuity. Deep within the crumbling base, the Fang made his final stand in the quantum computing core. Around him, banks of crystal processors melted like ice in a furnace, decades of shadow technological advancement dissolving into useless sludge. His remaining officers worked desperately to send a final warning to the shadow homeworld, but every transmission they attempted was corrupted into meaningless static. Commander Red paused in his journey to the upper levels, his neural implant detecting a surge of activity in the base's communication arrays. He smiled slightly. The shadows were trying to boost their signal strength to break through the nanite interference. They didn't realize they were only giving his microscopic army more power to work with. The base's structural integrity was failing faster now. Entire corridors began to warp and twist as the nanites broke down and reconstructed the molecular bonds of the shadow's advanced materials. The process released strange lights and ethereal mists, turning the once sterile military facility into something that looked more like a haunted cavern. "Sir!" A young shadow warrior burst into the quantum core, his normally sleek armor corroded and pitted. "The prisoner, he's not human. The medical analysis just came through. His entire cellular structure is." "I know what he is," the Fang interrupted, his mandibles clicking in a pattern that expressed both rage and respect. "He's a ghost. One of their elite infiltrators. The humans didn't just send us a soldier, they sent us a living weapon." In the upper levels, Red's nanites had finished constructing his escape vehicle. What had once been a shadow storage bay was now a launch pad for a small but powerful ship, built from the transformed remnants of the base's own materials. Its systems were a hybrid of human and shadow technology, created by the nanites according to the plan stored in Red's neural implant. The base's internal sensors picked up the first signs of quantum instability in the reactor core. The nanites hadn't just sabotaged it, they had fundamentally altered its atomic structure. When it finally breached, it wouldn't just explode. It would create a localized quantum anomaly that would erase all traces of the base's existence, along with any evidence of how it had been destroyed. In the quantum core, the Fang watched as his final transmission attempt failed. But in that failure, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The corruption of their transmission wasn't random, it was being captured, decoded, and stored. Every desperate attempt to call for help had only given the human more of their classified data. How long? The Fong asked his science officer. How long has he been planning this? The science officer's response was interrupted by a base-wide broadcast. It wasn't in the shadow language this time, but in clear, simple human standard. 20 years ago, the shadows attacked a human colony world. They thought they left no survivors. They were wrong. They left one, a child who grew up to join the Ghost program. A child who spent 20 years learning every detail of shadow technology, preparing for this moment. Red's voice echoed through the dying base, carrying no hatred or anger, just the cold certainty of a mission long in the making. Your mistake wasn't capturing me. Your mistake was giving me exactly what I've spent 20 years waiting for, access to a shadow military installation. Everything that's happening now was planned before you ever saw me. The nanites, the infiltration, the destruction, it's all been waiting for the right moment. For you to bring the right human into your base. The Fong understood then. They hadn't captured a soldier, they had invited in an apocalypse disguised as a man. Their pride, their belief in their technological superiority, had blinded them to the most dangerous aspect of humanity, their patience. Their ability to turn defeat into an opportunity for an even greater victory. As the base's systems entered their final collapse, Red reached his escape ship. Behind him, 2 decades of preparation were about to pay off in a display of destruction that would become legendary in both human and shadow space. The hunters had become the hunted, and they never saw it coming until it was far too late. The base's reactor core had become a swirling vortex of impossible colors, its containment chamber warping under forces that defied the normal laws of physics. The nanites had transformed it into something that existed between realities, a quantum bomb that would not just destroy the base, but erase it from existence itself. Commander Red sat in his newly constructed ship, watching through the vessel's hybrid sensors as the shadow base began its final death throes. His neural implant streamed data about the preceding destruction, confirming that everything was proceeding exactly as planned. 20 years of preparation were about to pay off. In the quantum computing core, the Fong made his final decision. Instead of trying to escape, he turned to his remaining warriors. Observe, he commanded, his mandibles clicking in their race's expression of grim acceptance. This is what happens when you underestimate humanity. When you think their technological inferiority makes them less dangerous. We thought ourselves their superiors, and in our pride, we gave them exactly what they needed to destroy us. The base's structure was now more energy than matter, glowing with an inner light that hurt the eyes of anyone who looked at it too long. The nanites had transformed every piece of shadow technology into components of what was essentially a massive quantum reactor, ready to implode at the precise moment Red had calculated years ago. Through the base's few remaining functional cameras, Red watched the shadow warriors in their final moments. Some fought against their fate, trying to jury-rig equipment that no longer obeyed the normal laws of physics. Others stood in silence, accepting their defeat with the dignity their race was famous for. A few tried to document what was happening, hoping their final observations might warn others. But there would be no warnings. No lessons learned. When the quantum reaction reached its peak, it would create a localized bubble of altered spacetime that would remove the base from history itself. Not even dust would remain to tell the story of what happened here. Red's ship hummed to life, its engines a perfect fusion of human ingenuity and shadow technology. The nanites had built it to survive what was coming, incorporating elements of the shadow's own phase shift technology that they used to avoid detection. He would be the only witness to what was about to happen. In the final minutes, the Fong received one last message on his personal communicator: "Your people took everything from a child 20 years ago. That child grew up to become me. Consider the symmetry, now I take everything from you. But remember, you chose this. You could have stayed in your own territory. You could have left humanity alone. Remember that in your final moments. The reactor core's containment finally failed, but instead of an explosion, there was an implosion. Space itself seemed to bend and fold, the laws of physics twisting under the influence of the nanite-modified quantum reaction. The base began to collapse inward, not violently, but with an almost gentle inevitability, like water flowing down a drain. Red's ship rose through the dissolving upper levels of the base, its special shielding protecting it from the quantum effects that were erasing the Shadow Fortress from existence. Through his neural link, he sent one final command to his nanite army: initiate total conversion. The effect was beautiful in its own way. The entire base began to glow with a soft, blue-white light. The Shadow Warriors, their weapons, their technology, even the very atoms of their bodies began to break down and reform into pure energy. There was no pain, no violence, just a quiet transformation from matter to energy to nothingness. The Fawn's last sight was of his command center dissolving into points of light, like stars being born in reverse. His final thought was a grudging admission: humans didn't need superior technology to be dangerous. Their true weapon was their ability to turn anything, even capture, even defeat, into an opportunity for victory. 12 hours after the base's disappearance, a shadow battle fleet arrived in response to their last automated distress signal. What they found defied explanation: a perfectly circular crater 10 kilometers wide, its edges smooth as glass. There was no debris, no radiation, no signs of battle. It was as if someone had simply erased a piece of the planet's surface from existence. Commander Red watched from high orbit, his hybrid ship's cloaking systems making him invisible to the shadow vessels. His neural implant recorded their frantic scans, their confused communications, their growing realization that one of their most secure facilities had simply ceased to exist. The data would be valuable for future operations. The shadow ships deployed ground teams to investigate. Red observed as their best scientists took readings, collected samples, and tried to understand what had happened. But they would find nothing. The quantum reaction hadn't just destroyed the base, it had removed it from the normal flow of spacetime. Even the most advanced shadow scanning technology couldn't detect traces of something that, technically, had never existed. In his ship's cabin, Red accessed the vast amount of data his nanites had stolen before the base's destruction. Shadow military protocols, weapon specifications, classified research, everything they thought was safely stored in their quantum computers was now in human hands. But more importantly, he had their deployment schedules, their supply routes, their strategic plans. The Shadow Fleet's commander made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career: he ordered a full retreat from the sector. In a single day, without firing a shot, humanity had forced the Shadows to abandon territory they had spent years claiming. The psychological impact of the base's disappearance would prove more devastating than any conventional military defeat. Red sent a coded transmission to Human High Command: Operation Ghost Light complete. Shadow base eliminated. Full tactical data acquired. Request permission to proceed to Phase 2. The response came quickly: permission granted. Ghost Operative Red, you are clear to begin systematic dismantling of Shadow military infrastructure using acquired intelligence. As his ship prepared to jump to its next target, Red thought about the colony he'd watched burn 20 years ago. He remembered the fear, the helplessness, the rage. But most of all, he remembered his vow, that someday, he would make the Shadows understand what it felt like to be powerless. To watch everything they'd built vanish into nothing. The Shadow High Command received reports from across their territory in the following days. More facilities began to experience mysterious system failures. Weapons platforms went offline. Communication arrays stopped responding. The Shadow military leadership began to realize the true scope of their defeat: the loss of their base was just the beginning. In the great meeting hall of the Shadow High Command, their supreme military leader made an unprecedented announcement: we are initiating a full military withdrawal from all human-contested space. The cost of continuing this conflict has become unacceptable. It was the closest the proud Shadow civilization had ever come to admitting defeat. Red's ship slipped silently through shadow space, its hybrid systems making it invisible to their best detection equipment. In his cabin, he reviewed the list of shadow military installations his nanites had already infiltrated. Thanks to the data stolen from the base, his microscopic armies were already in place, waiting for his signal. The shadows had thought they were the hunters, the superior species, the ones to be feared. But they had learned what so many others had learned before them: humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, their ships, or their guns. It was their ability to turn defeat into victory, to use their enemy's strength against them, to wait years if necessary to achieve their goals. As his ship vanished into faster-than-light travel, Red allowed himself a small smile. The shadows had taken everything from him, thinking they were destroying a potential threat. Instead, they had created exactly what they feared most: a human with the knowledge, patience, and capability to systematically dismantle their entire military infrastructure. They had thought taking a human prisoner was a victory. Instead, it had become the beginning of their empire's end.